Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts. We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure. I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Recurring guest star,
JD. We bring you this introsode being recorded on September 22nd, Hobbit Day.
So Agnes, tell me a bit about yourself.
I'm 31. I'm happily married to my husband, Stephen, and we have two children, Samantha and Benjamin. Sam is 1 year old and Ben is 5 months old. In the real world, I teach mathematics at the local community college.
I actually have 4 kids. Shouting them out now, they're Will, Coda, Victoria, and Jamie. They run the whole gamut from teenager to baby. My youngest is 2, though, so I guess more toddler. And I am a medical receptionist at a very busy specialist clinic. So you have here, we're going to talk about how did we first experience Tolkien? Did you want to start that?
Sure, I can start us off. My family didn't know basically anything about Tolkien or The Lord of the Rings, except that my mom knew she had not enjoyed reading The Hobbit. So she had not been especially interested in pursuing more from an author she had not previously enjoyed. But we had some family friends who were getting into Lord of the Rings, and my mom didn't want me to be left out, so when I was 11, The Fellowship of the Ring was airing on TV, and she recorded it, and she made me watch it, even though I didn't want to watch it. We put the VHS tape in the player, and by halfway through the prologue, I was hooked. I didn't realize at the time that it was all one story, though. I thought it was 3 independent stories.
Like an anthology.
More like Narnia. I hadn't read Narnia at the time, but
That's how you pictured it. It was a recording from like airing on cable, or it was a VHS? Like
it was airing on network TV.
Okay, and you recorded it on a
and my mom recorded it back on VHS when that was the technology.
And then did your mom watch this and then say, like, Agnes, you have to see this? Or was she like, let's just watch it?
She didn't watch it with me. She gave it to me as an assignment to watch because she trusted our friends to have good judgment about what was a good story and what wasn't. So because they were into it, she figured it was okay. And she just turned me loose with it. That was actually one of the funny things was in the past, I'd had nightmares and things from watching scary movies and TV shows. So basically anything scary wasn't allowed. And Lord of the Rings is PG-13 for scary images and violence.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to bring up later was when I first watched the trilogy, I did not expect it to have so much like fantasy horror tropes in it. Because a lot of the fantasy I was exposed to was a lot more lighthearted.
Peter Jackson is known in the horror genre for what he does. But my mom didn't know any of this. And she just let me watch it. It was halfway through the prologue when I realized I was hooked, and also that if she knew what this was, I would never be allowed to watch it. That I took it downstairs to watch it by myself to make sure I was alone watching it. I wanted to finish this, which was why I was so devastated when I got to the end of the movie and the story did not conclude. I remember vividly running upstairs. My mom was cooking dinner. I think it was pork chops. And I asked her for the Lord of the Rings books. I had never asked her for a book before. Reading was not my thing. I wasn't good at it. But when I asked for a book, the first time I ever asked her for a book, she stopped cooking dinner. And she went downstairs and she found the Lord of the Rings books that she owned, despite not wanting to read them. And she gave them to me. They were the first real book that I tried to read on my own. It took a lot of looking things up in the dictionary, but I got through them. And I loved them. After I fell in love with the movies, fell in love with the books, I watched and read them a lot, but never took the plunge into the deep lore until I was reading the books to Stephen, and somehow after that I just ended up taking that plunge and learning more about the deep lore of Middle-earth, and it's been one of the most rewarding knowledge journeys I've taken.
Now, I still am on the precipice of that. I haven't dipped my toe in even, but when I started Lord of the Rings, I was a bit older. I don't think I'd even heard of it really before. In 6th grade, I somehow stumbled across The Hobbit like through the school library, and we had to read a book anyway. My friend at the time was like, "Oh, he loved the Lord of the Rings, everything." I read The Hobbit. I actually really liked it, and then I didn't do anything else with the franchise for, I don't know, a good 10 years after that. I didn't think about it. I heard bits and pieces through different fantasy discussions. Anytime a piece of fiction has like a whole language in it, I love that. And anytime I researched that, it always came back to Tolkien. So I heard about Tolkien a lot through that. And also just like various fantasy properties, shows, movies, books, video games. A lot of, like, when I started getting into D&D, a lot of the world building tips came from people who would point to Tolkien and say, "Look what he did." And I'm like, well, I haven't seen it, but that sounds like a good idea. I did take the plunge and just watch the trilogy 2 years ago. I still haven't even read the full trilogy of the actual Lord of the Rings books. I read The Hobbit like a long time ago, a good 15 years ago. And that's about my full exposure, but I am totally in love with the world. And I already have a lot of respect for Tolkien from what I've heard from him in the other discussions, and I'm really excited to actually get into his work.
So would you say that it's a fair statement that most of your contact with Tolkien is through adaptation?
Definitely. I read The Hobbit directly, but that's about it.
Wonderful. I think that's a great way to first get into him. And in fact, this kind of all builds to what brings us together to make this podcast. We're here today because it's September 22nd, which is Hobbit Day.
Which I did want to, because I'm into world building, I want to know, do Hobbits have the Gregorian Julian calendar? Do they have, Gandalf said October, September is Hobbit Day. I don't know if that's just like a transliteration.
So, we use the Gregorian calendar. The Julian calendar was before that. There's actually several different calendars in the world of Middle-earth. Usually, in the Lord of the Rings text, the Hobbit calendar is what's used, and the Hobbit calendar has 12 30-day months.
So roughly similar.
Roughly similar, but it leaves you with a few days over.
Mm-hmm.
And those extra days are used to celebrate the summer and winter solstices, Lithe and Yule. Now, as far as the names for the months and even the holidays, the Lord of the Rings is ostensibly a translation from an old text.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
This old text would have been written in a language called Westron, and J.R.R. Tolkien was the fortunate man to have sole access to this ancient manuscript, and he used his skills as a linguist to translate this text for us into English, and he took the liberties of taking the names of these 12 Hobbit months and matching them up to approximately what it would be in our calendar.
So out there, do we have the actual original names of the Hobbit months somewhere?
I think so.
We'll get on that. We'll look it up.
I will check that out. I will bring you 12 names of Hobbit months if I can find it.
And probably not one will stick, if I'm being honest, but I'm very interested just to see if it's there. That's my favorite thing is anytime in the Lord of the Rings when there's something like that, you just lift the cover up, there's always something there.
Yeah, you can always dive deeper. There's always a more complicated answer for any question.
Yeah. So for the plan for the show, we're going to finish. I haven't even finished all of the major adaptations that most people be exposed to. I haven't seen the newer Hobbit movies. We're going to do a rewatch through of the original 3. We already started with the first one. And then we're going to, is it read the text after?
Well, basically, originally for the podcast, my thought had been to jump in with the Lord of the Rings movies and then move on right to the Lord of the Rings books, because that was how I was introduced to the world.
A lot of people were,
yeah. It was right, like, jump right from the movies into the books. And I realized the other day that one of the reasons I wanted to do a Lord of the Rings podcast was to take someone with me on a new journey of Lord of the Rings. And I realized the other night that at this point, jumping from the Lord of the Rings movies into the Lord of the Rings books isn't the path that would be most natural for a new fan anymore. Your description of the of your first experiences with Tolkien, like you said, are mostly adaptations. People are most likely going to be watching the Lord of the Rings movies first, moving on to the Hobbit movies, then probably jumping into the new Rings of Power show, probably even before actually touching one of the books, certainly before finishing one of the books.
Yeah, if I wasn't doing this podcast and had a roadmap on how we were going to do this, that's how I probably would have, I may have, although I'm famous for not watching or consuming stuff in any order. I may have started Rings of Power before even seeing The Hobbit and been totally lost.
Which is a completely valid way to do it as well, but we have to pick one way to do it.
Yeah, structure would be nice for the show, I agree.
Any way that you come to it is valid, but the progression of Lord of the Rings movies, Hobbit movies, Rings of Power, before we touch any texts, strikes me now as being the most natural way to bring you, JD, and any of our audience members who want to follow along into the world of Tolkien.
Which I'm excited for, because I kind of was itching to start the Rings of Power, and doing that before reading the books just gets me that much closer.
As we're recording this, season 2 is almost complete. We definitely won't get to it before the end of season 2. They only have 2 more episodes left to drop for season 2. But if they take another 2 years to put out season 3...
Another 2
Well, there was 2 years between season 1 and season 2. If they take another 2 years between season 2 and season 3, we'll definitely be into some text by then. So we can always interrupt our analysis of the text to cover the news around new Rings of Power. So it will also bring us up to speed on that and make us a timely, relevant podcast much more quickly.
All right. So did you want to mention some of the themes that we'll be discussing in the movies and the adaptations?
Well, I have one more point actually under plan for the show.
Okay.
So I realize this is going to be a long way off in the future of the show, but I've listened to many Lord of the Rings podcasts, and something that I would really like to listen to but doesn't exist, therefore I want to make it, is a podcast that looks at other stories through the values of the Tolkien Legendarium. So someday down the line, if we ever get that far, I would love to look at stories like Narnia, Game of Thrones, Avatar: The Last Airbender, other sci-fi and fantasy series, and try to look at the themes and values represented in these stories and compare them to the themes and values we find in Lord of the Rings. I think that would be an interesting exercise.
What is the Legendarium?
The Legendarium is the term that's generally used for the greater collected works of Middle-earth.
Got it. So this is kind of when we're out of content to consume directly, or adaptations of the works, we'll compare the themes to other works, is kind of what you're saying.
We'll never be out of content, but I really want to get on to talking about other other books and stories as well. So
Yeah.
rather than having our 800 episode be about something minor from the history of Middle Earth, we can leave that to the actual Tolkien experts that are out there, and do something new and fresh.
Sounds good.
So some of the themes and values that I would like to look at as we're going through the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, the Silmarillion, the adaptations, and therefore some of the themes that I would like to look at when we're looking at other stories as well, are things like fate and free will, hope and despair, dominance, power, corruption, versus friendship, love, and redemption. There's themes of industrialization, and Tolkien was very critical of what people generally call progress, so attitudes towards progress. Mortality, pity, and compassion have big roles in Lord of the Rings and surrounding texts.
Yeah, I've noticed those ones a lot just watching the first movie in preparation for this podcast.
Yeah, we should definitely look at these themes as they show up in the movie, and we'll start picking them apart more so when we start diving into the text. Ends versus means is something that is an interesting topic in Lord of the Rings. It's sometimes it's explicitly talked about, ends and means, and even where it's not explicitly talked about, there are some lessons to be learned about what happens to characters who use various ends and means. Community is a very important theme in the books, and pride and humility would be something to look at as well.
So we got a lot of bases to cover there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But that's good if we're looking to compare to other works of media. That's a lot to work with.
Definitely.
So we've been blessed.
And not every theme is going to be prominent in every podcast. It'll different themes.
I wanted to cover industrialization every single episode, so I'm kind of let down on
Okay, let's find a way to cover industrialization every single episode. I'm down.
I'm sure we could, really. Like, honestly.
Let's do it. No, you made a challenge. Now we're going to do it.
Okay.
So, earlier you were asking about what makes a legendarium, and honestly, I gave you a vague answer. I said that the greater works of Tolkien.
Okay. Yes.
But your question gets at the heart of a problem that may or may not actually be a problem. It's certainly something that a lot of people think about, which is, what is canon? Are you familiar with the term canon having been used in fandom?
Yeah, like what is? I mean, it's originally from the Catholic Church fandom. It's like, what is official and part of the universe, the lore, and what is extra and not officially true. And also, it's very prevalent with growing up. My thing that I was a nerd about, I've not followed as close. Star Wars has a lot of canon issues, so I learned about canon when I was before I was a teenager as well, about this certain property not being canon. So what happens is not going to be considered followed up upon, or if it is, it's an offshoot timeline, almost stuff like that. Or I imagine, and I'm sure you'll go into more detail with Tolkien's work. He had a lot of notes that he didn't actually put into books, and it's like, well, was this something he wanted to keep, or stuff like that? And then other than notes, like just all. Well, I'm sure you'll explain more what there is with that.
Yeah. Exactly what you're saying. Canon's basically what's official versus what isn't canon. It isn't official. Not real in a certain sense.
Is there a lot that's not known if it's canon or not, or debatably canon?
So
I guess you could say.
I think the question of canon is definitely complicated, murky, and the harder you stare at it, the less important it becomes.
The best kind of thing.
If you stare long enough into the canon stares back into you. I view this issue as a series of concentric circles. So, at the heart of the canon is the work that Tolkien himself published.
Okay.
Which is literally and only just the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings texts.
So 4 books?
Well, Lord of the Rings is kind of one book.
Mm-hmm.
It's in 3 volumes, but it's one story.
So 2 books, even less. 2 books.
Yeah, I would think of it as being 2 books, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. He had other academic things that he published, translation of Beowulf, stuff like that. But
2, yeah, okay.
But he had 2 Middle-earth texts that he published, which was The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings.
So those 2 books are everything that's indisputably canon.
In some sense, that is the strictest definition of canon.
I can see that.
When we expand our view of canon a little bit further, though, like you said, Tolkien had a lot of notes, and he had oftentimes very complete notes. And his son, Christopher Tolkien, was his scholar. Christopher Tolkien went through and organized everything, and Christopher Tolkien put together and edited the Silmarillion.
Mm.
I think with a few pages of exceptions, everything in the Silmarillion is Tolkien's own words.
Okay.
But he never he never got it published. He wanted it published, but the publishers wouldn't publish it for him.
Yeah, I can see why. When were the Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit published?
The Hobbit was 1937.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord of the Rings was, I believe, 1954 through 56. These are U.S. dates. They might be a little different in Britain.
Okay. So I could see after he publishes The Lord of the Rings, in the 60s, publishers being like, this isn't going to make money. We're not going to print.
Yeah, the reason The Lord of the Rings is in 3 volumes is because it was so long that it wasn't cost effective to publish it as one volume. Paper was expensive after World War II. Mm-hmm. So in order to make
there's a lot of people printing.
In order to make the cost more reasonable, it became 3 books.
Well, I kind of like that, because then you just you read and finish one book and you feel so completed and proud of yourself.
Sure.
I mean, it sounds like there might be real issues with splitting it up, or not really?
No, it doesn't matter to me. Tolkien didn't like it. He didn't like having to come up with names for the different books because he really saw it as one story.
Oh, yeah, that'd be hard.
Mm-hmm. So, like, what are the 2 towers is a great question that Tolkien didn't really have the answer to, because he just slapped a title on the middle part of the book. He was like...
It just sounded good.
He was like, this is all Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings, sure. 2 towers? Okay.
I mean, The Return of the King is a spoiler in the title.
You don't know that, though. I
know the King returns.
Yeah, okay, I get it now. I just had to think about it for 3 seconds.
But anyway, so if we pull back our view from the things that Tolkien actually published in his lifetime, I think the Silmarillion is the next thing that could be accepted as canon. But strictly speaking, Tolkien didn't publish it, even though it is like 99.9% all his own words.
Okay, and so there is some questions about some of it not being his actual written word.
I think I think Christopher Tolkien wrote like a page of transitional material throughout the entire book, just to like
got it
move something along. The big things that Christopher Tolkien did, though, was he made decisions about sometimes important things that Tolkien might have been rethinking, especially later in life.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Is there anything that got published in that Tolkien wanted to scrap or change?
Well, it's a great question, because that gets into the mind of the author. And ultimately, he didn't talk about everything he wanted to do to necessarily everyone. A great example of this would be the origin of orcs. The what's published in the Silmarillion is that the orcs are corrupted elves, But this presents a lot of metaphysical problems, which I'm sure we'll unpack one day in a different
I
podcast.
in my notes in the first movie, I was curious why orcs just came from the ground.
Well, they don't.
I may have also misunderstood what was going on.
You perfectly understood what was going on in the movie. There's a reason that Peter Jackson made that decision to do that. He wanted to keep the movies PG-13. If he depicted how Saruman made his Uruk-hai from what's implied in the books, it would not have been a PG-13 movie.
Joy. I can't wait to hear more on that.
But anyway, having the orcs come from corrupted elves presents its own metaphysical issues. Tolkien wasn't comfortable with all of the implications that came with, and he was thinking about different origin stories for the orcs. And as far as anyone knows, he never really came to a final conclusion.
Yeah, I could imagine that caused a lot of issues.
So his son picked one and ran with it. He had to pick one of them if he was going to publish anything.
So this might be a question that there's an answer to. Is there a lot that could have been or is likely to, or that we know was on the chopping block that didn't get published in the Silmarillion that was in his notes?
Yes. In fact, the history of Middle-earth was the explanation, basically, for how Christopher Tolkien made the decisions he did to make the Silmarillion. So all of the actual chopped text, all of the drafts that Tolkien made coming up to different things, you can read about in the history of Middle-earth. It reads like a textbook. It's very hard to read it start to finish. It makes a way better reference book than a storybook. It is an academic slog. It's very interesting if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, leafing through textbooks and encyclopedias was my jam. Like, I would always go to nonfiction in the library during elementary school. And still is when I can, of course.
Well, maybe the history of Middle-earth will be for you.
We'll have to see.
So, the history of Middle-earth, then, is what I would say is the next concentric circle of canon, which I would say is closer to not canon than canon.
We're leaving the realm of authenticity. Like we're getting further away from.
There are definitely ideas in the history of Middle-earth that were never explicitly cut. So there might be some nuggets there that you might personally want to believe about the world. But there's also a lot of ideas that directly contradict things that are explicitly published in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings that were explicitly scrapped. And so not everything in the history of Middle-earth is going to even be consistent, much less be canon.
That makes sense. I mean, they're essentially these are getting close to just reading his notes, right?
Yeah. Christopher Tolkien writes a lot of editorial in the history of Middle-earth. He's always clear what's his father's words and what's his words.
That's good.
But he writes a lot in the history of Middle-earth, whereas in the Silmarillion, it's his father's words.
It's his father's word, except for maybe like one transitional paragraph or something.
It's like he has a page in there. But the Silmarillion was meant to be a cohesive text, a history book. It's not like the Lord of the. It's not a storybook like the Lord of the Rings, but it is its own text.
Yeah. Is there anything moving out from there, or did you have more to say on?
The last level I wanted to make mention of was adaptation, which is absolutely not canon. What happens in an adaptation stays in the adaptation, and So
just judging based off of what I've had with most fandom, I know adaptations often will just change stuff wholesale. Or we mentioned the orcs had to come up with something new because of the rating. But there's also there's the adaptation. I would, and I don't mean to mess with your diagram. If this doesn't make sense, let me know. If there should be another concentric ring, but I'm sure there's also tons of fan theory that is just based off of vibe and nothing written, and I feel like that might belong in the same circle. perhaps, or maybe be another circle out, or be two halves of the outer circle.
So I think what you're describing is usually called headcanon.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Headcanon should be on this diagram somewhere, even if it's the outer box that these circles are on.
And I think that depends a little bit as to how textually based your headcanon is.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Some strong textually based headcanon might be more, I don't know, relevant or ring more true, even if it's not based off actual canon.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who's an expert in these texts might have something that works way better than just the adaptation for Hollywood or marketing or other just directional artistic freedom reasons.
Yeah, I don't think headcanon has its own ring, because I think I think it goes through all the rings.
Okay.
Like the center circle, if you have if you're working with a very strongly implied bit of information from,
but it's not explicitly written, it's inferred,
strictly
from
speaking, that would probably be a headcanon, but also be canon, because the professional English teachers would agree that it is implied by the text, sort of thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Whereas, if you want to pair off two people who live thousands of years apart, that might be your prerogative, but that's called fan fiction.
Yeah.
Which is a great exercise for literary criticism, but also is absolutely not canon.
Yeah, I could see that happening a lot. Is there, before we leave the problem with canon, you bring something up interesting. Is there any time travel in Lord of the Rings?
I'm so glad you asked that. So, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were friends. They worked at the same college, and they met together for a club, and they had a bet to try to write some science fiction.
Okay.
And Lewis was supposed to write space travel, and Tolkien was supposed to write time travel. Mm-hmm. Lewis's books became the Into the Silent Planet series. He actually went on and published them. Tolkien, as per his MO, started a project and never finished it. And so he started...
Sounds legit.
He started a story of time travel where some characters traveled back in time to the island of Numenor, which we will learn about the island of Numenor when we get to watching Rings of Power.
Okay.
But this is an example of a story that he started and never published, never even finished. And how canonical is it is a great question, because he was writing it on a dare.
Yeah.
He had to write a time travel story, and he decided to put it in his world that he'd made up.
He really should have just wrote at the top of all of his pages, like, this is real. I'm just playing around here, guys. I feel like it would have made a lot of things a lot clearer. Because, like, I feel like that, like, going off your description of it, that doesn't sound like it's actually canon, even though he literally wrote it. To me, but I have not read the work. I have not.
Well, maybe we can do a special.
I don't even know the isles that were traveled to, but just it being on a dare sounds like he just was like, I have this world already. I need to make a time travel story. Let's go.
I'd be inclined to agree with you. But this is definitely something we can dig into more.
But it's not a regular part of any of the major, I don't know, plot threads or anything like that I'm not aware of it. That's why I would ask.
No, it's not part of the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, we have segments for the show. Do you want to hear about the segments for the show?
Definitely.
So, one of the segments I'm most excited for is Middle-earth meals. I'm going to make food from, hopefully from whatever segment we're doing that day, but I'll have to switch it up sometimes, I'm sure.
Yeah, I can imagine some of the stuff we're reading about, we don't want to eat food from that time or place. Occasionally.
Occasionally. Also, I might want to do a Middle-earth meals when we haven't talked about food for a while.
Yeah.
There also might be more things to eat in a particular segment than I can cook in for one podcast.
Fair.
So
I'm excited about this too. For the record, I am a big fan of eating. I don't think I'll be a very good food critic because I will just say it's delicious, but I think that's okay.
well, as long as you think it's delicious. But I'm looking forward to making Bilbo's birthday cake for our first episode. I'm just gonna make a cake.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna put 111 candles on it.
What 111? Oh, 111.
Yeah, like the number candle. Like the number candles.
Mm-hmm. Oh, like the ones that are written out. Well, technically, a birthday candle is already a 1, if you think about it.
Well, he had 111 candles on his cake in the movie. I can at least try to make it look like. But I'm also not that good a cake maker. Regardless, though, Middle-earth meals. I make some food, we eat it, we review it, we tell you about the recipe I used.
That's good. I enjoy cooking, but I am not very consistent, so I'm
happy to do the cooking.
I'm happy to do the eating, and if we were discussing the recipes, I know a thing or two about cooking, not much about baking at all. I will just trust your word on how the flour did its thing.
Yep.
Cooking, I might be interested to hear the techniques though.
We will definitely have to have one where we compare several lembas breads. Lembas bread is something that I haven't found a good one yet.
Really?
Yes, I've made several lembas bread recipes, and I just don't like any of them. So maybe we'll finally find a good lembas bread recipe.
Maybe we can make one.
If anyone knows a good lembas bread recipe, we need to try.
Email Agnes personally, or the show.
Email found at the end of the show. Another segment I have is Hobbit Habits.
Mm-hmm. And what's that one?
A little lifestyle segment about suggested ways to be more Hobbit-like.
Okay.
Eating Middle-earth meals is a great way to be more Hobbit-like.
It's a good start.
I bet you didn't know that we were going to have a Hobbit Habits segment right now to say that eating your Middle-earth meals makes you more Hobbit.
Oh, so we're just discussing, or are we going to actually perform these and report back these habits?
We could do that.
I think we could do that.
Yeah, we could do that, and rate how Hobbity we feel after.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I like that idea. Another segment would be Wizard's Wisdom, favorite quotes from that day's coverings. So, whether we're watching the movies, watching the show, reading the books, we pick out some of our favorite quotes. It could be the most evocative quote, favorite alliteration. Tolkien loved alliteration.
And there are so many good ones. I mean, just that's something that struck me rewatching Lord of the Rings, the first one. It's just every line is iconic, and I hear it quoted all the time. People link to everything. It is a very quotable work, and at least every 15 minutes is like, oh yeah, this scene. I think about this scene all the time. Like this line is exactly how we'll go over specifics. I'm sure I took some in my notes, and if not, I could find 18 easily if I just sat and thought about it. But covering the actual work, it'll be very easy to find quotes.
Well, I think it would be cool if we each could pick I was going to say 1 to 3.
Is 18 a bit much?
18's probably a bit much. I don't want to run into copyright issue by reenacting the entire movie.
Yeah, no, I've heard about the copyright issues with Tolkien's estate. Don't want to touch that.
Yeah, just pick a couple quotes, each one of us, and talk about those as highlights from. Okay,
so you said most evocative and alliteration.
Other ideas I had were just a best message or overall favorite. We can make categories as we find quotes that fit them.
So the categories are made to suit the quotes, not the other way around.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. Tolkien's quotes are like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember reading The Hobbit. There was a lot of, not even dialogue quotes, but just, narrative, that was, oh, that is a funny way to say that.
Funniest quote. New category.
Yeah.
Another segment I thought of was Tolkien trivia. We could ask some questions and let the audience play along. Self-graded, no prizes.
I'll say good job if you do a good job. Just let me know.
Yeah, let us know how you do. Magical Melodies would be a quick poetry analysis section. There's
I
lots
vaguely
of
remember
poems
this.
in the books.
Yeah,
And you just read The Hobbit.
Lord of the Rings. No.
So I have something very controversial to say.
Okay.
It is okay to skip the poems when you read the books.
I think I did.
It's not
that.
okay for you to skip the poems,
Okay.
JD.
It's okay for other people who aren't me to skip the poems. But
You are doing a podcast. You need to read
the standard's a bit higher. Okay, that makes sense.
For those who are out there reading the books, who everyone tells you don't skip the poems. The poems are so important, and you know what? Those people are absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm.
The poems are important, but at the same time, you get so much out of Lord of the Rings by not reading the poems as well. And the poems are very intimidating. I get that.
Yeah. So you're saying if the poems are stopping you from finishing the book, just finish the book.
I would every time I would rather
Except me.
I would rather someone read the book and skip the poems every single time.
Except me.
I would rather you read the books and skip the poems, because if you don't read the book,
Then not reading the books.
then I lose my podcast.
That would be a big problem if I didn't read the books. Yeah.
But given as making a podcast is a big enough commitment, I think you can skim some poetry.
Probably. I'll probably like it.
But hopefully some magical melodies can help at least one audience member get through a poem that he skipped otherwise.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Because like I said, the poems are important. People who say that you shouldn't skip the poems because they're important are absolutely correct. They are. But so is reading the book.
Read the book, go back to the poems if you're struggling with them.
The first time I read the poetry was probably my 9th time reading Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow. And I'm going to have to do it on the first go. But that's how committed I am.
I hated reading the poetry. And it didn't hurt me.
Did the Hobbit have poetry, or am I misremembering?
The Hobbit did have some
poetry. It does
poetry.
have some poetry. Okay, good. I also read the novel, because in middle school we had like silent reading time. We had to read these books for 15 minutes in class. There was nothing else to do. And I read other books too that had like songs and poems in them, and I just wanted to make sure that wasn't some cross bleed into the Hobbit, but there were definitely poems in the Hobbit.
Yes, there are definitely a few poems in the Hobbit.
Are they good?
I think they're good. Yeah.
Okay.
They're more for children. They're less complicated.
Is the Hobbit's considered a children's book, right?
It is. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll look at some poems, some songs in Lord of the Rings. Another segment I lined up was language, lore, and letters. This would be a nice time to dip into the letters that Tolkien wrote to his family or to readers of his books or publishers, to look at the circumstances around the publication or his own opinions about his own works.
I've heard some of Tolkien's thoughts on his works, on specific things that I'm not going to get into right now, but this segment I feel like has a lot of meat on its bones.
Definitely.
He talked a lot. I mean, he was an author, so and authors are famously good at talking. That's what they do.
Yes, and Tolkien was especially good at studying his own works from a third-person perspective. He would write his book, and then if someone had a question about his book, he didn't just divine the answer with extra information.
Yeah.
He said, let's look at what I wrote and draw conclusions from what's already there. Was tended to be more his.
Yeah. Interesting.
So yeah, this particular segment will have lots of mileage we can get out of it. And finally, the last segment that I've thought of so far would be what I call the Shire Post, for just questions, comments, and reviews from listeners.
So currently, nothing.
Currently, nothing. But if you have a question, comment, or a review that you would like featured on the podcast, you should write in to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com. So, JD, was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I talked about it as it came to mind, so I do not have any finishing notes here that I could think of, except I'm excited to finish through this. I'm excited even rewatching the movies, even though I only first seen them, like, it's been since COVID, so 21 or 22, two or 3 years. There's so much I missed and so much to pick up on, and I'm having a great time watching them. I'm excited to watch more.
Same. I watched the first half of The Fellowship in preparation for recording our next episode already, and there was so much I got out of this watch through that I had never noticed before, and I've seen these movies 100 times, probably not exaggerating, and there was like half a dozen new things I noticed this time through, so it's already been worth it.
Yeah, and I have a lot of notes, a lot of things I would like to say. I'm going to save it for the first episode or the second. I'm counting this as episode 0.
This is episode 0.
Yeah, so I'm going to save it for the first official episode, and I'm excited to share my thoughts.
Awesome. A special thank you to our editor and spiritual director, Stephen Jeffrey, and thank you for listening.